Hola, and welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. So, for today's Todd Talk, we will continue on our theme of underachievement. And the last Todd Talk, I talked about 10 causes of underachievement, the 10 major causes, although there are many more than that. And so, today I'm going to talk about strategies that you can use for each of those causes. So, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today comes from my book, When Smart Kids Underachieve in School by Proofrock Press. So, if you want to get more details than the short synopsis I'm going to be giving, then this is a good resource for doing that. So, we talked about last time that you have to kind of diagnose underachievement. It's not something that's easy to test. You just have to know your students and you have to know whether they're capable of and whether they're living up to that potential or not. And so we also talked about the 10 major causes of underachievement, each of those which is listed here. And so what I'm going to be offering is strategies for helping with each of those. Now, here's the problem with these strategies is that just because it works one day doesn't mean it's going to work the next. And you have to properly diagnose the student. So if you're saying that peers are the issue and you try to deal with that using one of their strategies and that's really not the issue, then you may not be able to help them, with their underachievement. So the first cause is boredom. So there are lots of strategies you can use. One is pre-assessment. So we should be pre-assessing students. And if they know stuff, we shouldn't make them do the lessons that we have planned for them. We should try to come up with something else or allow them to work on an independent study. Project-based learning is, I think in general, we have students in very passive roles and we need to have them in more active roles, and project-based learning is a great way to do that, where you set a project and then the students do the work and they're trying to accomplish that project. And then another one is alternative assessment. So oftentimes we have traditional assessments of paper to pencil, other things you could be doing to allow them to show what they're capable of. I once had a student who wanted to be the next Steven Spielberg, and so every time we had something, he wanted to turn in a movie of what he had learned. And I let him do this because that was his talent and it was something that really interested him. So that's a strategy you can use with boredom as well. The second cause is social and emotional needs. So one thing you can do is we talked about some gifted students tend to defy the teacher, but when they're actually just curious or asking questions. So I always had a space in my class where kids could challenge me, the teacher. It started when I made a mistake on an assessment and the kid pointed it out, as gifted kids often do. They point out your mistakes. And then I just decided to start making mistakes on purpose on some of my assessments, and then challenging kids to try to find those mistakes. And similarly, like whenever we would participate in debates, I would be actively involved with that. So a student would go head to head with me so they could directly challenge their teacher. So I wanted to let them know that the culture and the atmosphere in the class was that it was okay to ask questions, and they shouldn't feel like they were doing something wrong by doing that. Advisory groups was one that we use in the program that I currently coordinate, where every week or every other week we get together and we talk about issues that are affecting our gifted students. And sometimes it's just good to talk about these things. It's just good to bring them up out in the open and to see that other people are also going through these. Lastly, activities that encourage risk taking. So, we want the greatest point of learning is when students are taking a risk on something. If they know everything, as gifted kids sometimes do, then they're not going to learn anything. So we have to figure out ways to encourage them to take chances and to, try something that might be difficult and not to shy away from that. The third cause is peers. So magnet programs is a good way. I talked about the difference between peer mates and age mates, which are everyone enters in at 6-year-old in the kindergarten. Even though they're age mates, they may not be peers because the student might think at a different level or think in a different way that the other students their age do not. So magnet programs are great because you bring all of your gifted students together and they're able to find peers. I mean, that's the program we pull from 7 different elementary schools into 1 middle school, where we house the gifted program. And I always have parents tell me all the time, it's the first time that they've been to a party or been invited to sleep over, or it's the first time they've had a friend. So, because they're starting to find peers. Cluster grouping is another way. So you don't have to pull them into one location. You can just cluster all the gifted kids. So if you have 11 kids who are gifted in reading, you can cluster them into one class and they're going to probably be able to find a peer. Lastly is acceleration. So if a kid is able to handle seventh grade math, but they're only a fifth grader, well, then why not put them in the seventh grade math? And then they're going to find, again, they're going to find peers, even though they're older than them, they're at the same intellectual level. And so they're going to be able to find peers. The fourth is home life. This is a tough one as a teacher to try to combat because you can't really do anything about their home life. You can't go into their home and change things. There are a few things you can do. So one is I always try to offer before and after school enrichment. So what I mean by this is I'd have a club that took place right before school or right after school to extend the school day so that students were in a place where they felt safe, where they felt welcome, where they felt valued. And so I would do STEM clubs, or I would do chess clubs, or I would do game board clubs. I did all sorts of different clubs to try to get to extend their day so that they had more time to spend with in a place where they could learn. So parent education seminars, it's never a good idea to tell parents how to raise their kids, but I would have general parent education seminars where I would say, here are some strategies you might use if your student is this. And, a lot of times, those parents would take that to heart because they, even though they hadn't thought about before, so it was just making them aware of some of the things, like maybe they were being had too high expectation of their students and trying to make them aware of those things. Lastly is field trips. So what I mean by this is we don't have to, it's in today's day and age, it's hard to do field trips during the school day, but what about doing a field trip like on a weekend or during the summer or something of that nature, where you take kids who maybe have never been to the zoo and have them have this great experience, or take them to the science center or the art museum, but just having options for kids. Because the reality is those parents might want to drop them off so that they don't, because they have things that they're doing, and so the kid gets an experience and doesn't have to worry about their home life, and how it's going to affect their underachievement. Twice exceptional is the next one, and there's a couple things you can do. First off, especially if you're dealing with kids who have learning disabilities, is to set short-term goals, realistic short-term goals. So you don't give them, a week to do something. You check in with them every day, and so you're checking with them, and you give them a few tasks to work on at a time. Having more tactile kinesthetic formats for learning, especially in math. Manipulatives are always good for twice exceptional kids, so they can actually, get a feel, a touch for what they're learning as well. And then specialized instruction and organizational techniques. Gifted kids in general tend to not be that organized. Not all gifted kids, but a lot, and especially twice exceptional kids. So do you have a strategy in place to help them with organization? We had one student in particular. Every week he met with a couple of girls in his class that were really good at organizing. They went through his book bag with him and they helped him to organize himself. So cause number 6 is lack of intrinsic motivation. So this is basically they just aren't interested in what it is that they're learning. So there's a few things you can do. You can do independent research projects where kids get choice on what they're going to be learning and how they're going to show what they learn. You do mentorships where you hook them up with someone who's an expert in a certain field, so that student is now going to feel challenged because they're talking with someone. We can't, as teachers, always be the experts. So having experts we can turn to outside of the classroom is always good. And then passion projects. So I did this with seniors in one of the programs I taught in, where the end of the senior year, you have that senioritis. We told kids, learn about something you've always wanted to learn about, and the whole time you've been in school that you've never learned about. And so kids chose different things that they were passionate about learning that they had not learned. And so we had wonderful results as a result because kids were interested in what they were doing. Lack of skills. So we sometimes assume that kids have these skills. So we have to be cognizant that we're teaching good test-taking skills, good note-taking skills, good research skills. Even older kids, we shouldn't assume that they know how to do these things. And in fact, they've probably developed bad habits that you kind of want to steer them away from. So teaching a kid how to take a test. How do you study for a test? What does that look like? It doesn't always have to be note cards that you're flipping through and memorizing only to forget a week later. Are there other things you can, other strategies you can use? So this requires the teacher to, whenever something's coming up that requires these skills, to get a feel for whether kids have these skills, and if they don't have them, to give them strategies for dealing with that. Lack of programming. So you don't have to have a program to enrich gifted students. You can have learning centers, which are set up where kids can go at their pace, that they're able to handle that. So you set up these learning centers so they're spread around the room, and kids go to, there's levels of difficulty of each one of these. So you're differentiating these learning centers, and kids can challenge themselves and go at their own pace. Differentiation in general. So any kid who's gifted in your classroom who may not be getting direct gifted services still needs to be challenged. They have special needs and wants as students, just like any other student does. And so we have to be willing to address those through differentiation. So that means asking them to think at a higher level. It doesn't mean having them to do more work. It's about having doing different work that's going to challenge them to think. It's going to challenge them to, tap into that potential of theirs. One thing I always like using as well as teacher as the student as a teacher. So when there was a kid who like really knew a lot about the Civil War, so I let him get up and talk about what he knew about the Civil War, and he taught the class, and it was really interesting. And so I started using that, and later on, where I would have units, and students I would say, you're in charge of teaching this, and then they would have to come up with a lesson plan, and it was always really interesting because then they got to kind of be in charge, and they took ownership of that. Not being challenged can be an issue. So at the high school level, sometimes it can be difficult because we only use advanced placement or college credit plus classes in a lot of cases, or honors classes. So having a gifted seminar where during their study hall or during lunch, kids can come in and do something that might be challenging for them. So whether it's a robotics club, or whether it's chess club or something of that nature, or a seminar about learning about how to be a wind tech, which is someone who goes to the top of windmills and works on them. And so just different things where you're exposing students to things, interesting things that they would find intriguing. Higher level questioning skills. I can't stress this one enough. You don't have to have any fancy kind of programs or anything to challenge gifted students. You simply have to be willing and be aware of the fact that you need to ask higher level questions. And you can use whether you depth of knowledge or Bloom's taxonomy, but being aware of the questions you're asking, and that you're not just asking recall questions or understanding questions, but you're asking analyzing questions and evaluation questions, and you're challenging students to think at that higher level. That can happen in any class. Doesn't cost anymore. It just is an awareness of the teacher. And then 4 corners projects. So often the complaint I get is that students finish early and they don't have anything to do, and so they cause disruptions, or the teacher just gives them more work that's the same of what they've already been doing. So I had the 4 corners projects in my classroom. And I told kids when if they finished early, they could go, check out one of those. And they were always high interest projects. That was something that wasn't linked to a content standard. It was just something that might be interesting to learn. And kids went over there, and it was interesting because even though it wasn't for a grade, many times students worked harder on those than they did on their actual classwork because it was something they were interested in. The last one is being too smart for your own good. I often say in gifted land, being gifted, it's nice to be gifted because you're going to get services, but sometimes being too gifted can be, a burden. So like when you think of people like Ted Kaczynski, who's the Unabomber, or Bobby Fischer, who is obviously a genius at a high level. When your IQ is like in the 160s, 170s, there's a lot of things that you have to work with. So one thing you do for kids who think at a higher level that don't feel like they school is for them is you can translate the abstract to concrete. So what I mean by that is students think very abstractly. High level, high ability gifted students think very abstractly. So how can you teach them strategies to translate that to concrete? So to make it so it fits into the real world, so that it can actually be used for something, so they can apply it. Dealing with perfectionism. Some kids who are high IQs have perfectionism. They want everything to be perfect, and they can struggle because of that. So they're not willing to take risks. They're not willing to try because of this perfectionism. So coming up with strategies that will help with that, whether it's one that I heard that I thought was really interesting is challenge students to do C work on a project and have the rubric. The only way they can get an A is by doing C work. And so teaching them it's okay not to do great work all the time. Lastly is showing them the long-term benefit of any lesson. So when a student asks you the question, why are you learning this? You should have an answer. And if you do not have an answer, you probably shouldn't be teaching that. So I always try to have a big picture question or a central question so students know how this fit into the real world or how this may fit into their lives.